We are months away from the next national election, but tonight the battle lines are drawn over the record number of new proposed state voting restrictions, including tighter requirements around those voter IDs. More states are moving to ask for proof of ID, not just to cast a ballot in person, but also by mail. So there's a big effort now underway to help the millions of Americans without ID. Here's ABC's Devin Dwyer.
For more than 20 years, just blocks from the White House,
I don't know how to do this. That's okay. I'm here to help.
Volunteers at Foundry Methodist Church have been ministering to the ID-less.
Which of the following streets have you never used?
Their steady voices a comfort in the complicated and costly maze of paperwork and online portals to prove to the government they are who they say they are.
If you don't have regular access to a computer, if you don't have a credit card, those are almost insurmountable obstacles to obtaining one.
Connie Folk is helping her brother Morris Cole obtain documents to renew his expired state ID.
And Morris, you don't have all that stuff handy.
No, I don't have it.
And what's an ID going to help you do?
Get social services.
Get some services.
An estimated 21 million Americans, 11% of all adults, don't have valid government identification.
Items get thrown away or wet or destroyed. People lose them in evictions. People might lose them in a fire or something like that. But the most common thing that we see is just they get destroyed or lost.
Without ID, most people cannot legally drive, apply for a job, or access social services. Morris said he can't apply for housing assistance and food stamps without valid ID. And in his home state of Virginia, he's also unable to vote.
Anytime you place a requirement to produce ID, it's going to be a barrier for folks who have to go through the process.
The barriers have become more burdensome in the pandemic, and as a growing number of states require official ID to cast a ballot.
The timing could not be more critical. When it comes to voter ID, procrastination is not your friend.
Wyoming this month became the 36th state to mandate ID to vote in person. 10 states require proof of ID to apply for a ballot to vote by mail. Georgia joined the list last month. Many state officials argue that proof of who you are should be a basic requirement for voting.
When voting in person in the state of Georgia, you must have a photo ID. It only makes sense for the same standard to apply to absentee ballots as well.
But critics say it's a requirement that excludes.
There are some politicians who want to manipulate the rules of the game so that some people can participate and some people can't.
At ID clinics like this one in Fort Worth, Texas, voter advocates are ramping up outreach. The state, one of 5 that volunteers from groups like Spread the Vote and Vote Riders have made a priority.
It's a good thing. I think everybody should try it out, man.
Helping hundreds of people successfully obtain new IDs since the last election.
I had gone in and out of jail and I lost all my documentation. I don't have, it was just a struggle to get the documents to be able to get an ID.
The average cost of a government ID is $40. Add in the price of obtaining the underlying documents, and some advocates see a modern-day poll tax.
We know from the mouths of the people who are trying to get these laws passed that there's a reason that they're doing it, and it's not about voter fraud. Every reputable study has found that we've had 0.0000009%, right? Like fraud at the polls. It doesn't happen.
For years, some Republicans have openly boasted about using ID requirements to gain a political edge.
And now we have photo ID, and I think photo ID is going to make a little bit of a difference as well.
If it hurts a bunch of college kids that's too lazy to get up off their bohunkus and go get a photo ID, so be it.
Right.
Voter ID, which is going to allow Governor Romney to win the state of Pennsylvania. Done.
But even with the ID law, Democrat Barack Obama won Pennsylvania in 2012. The nonpartisan National Bureau of Economic Research looked at more than a decade of voting trends and state ID laws and found no negative effect on registration or turnout, something conservative election experts say shows that voter ID doesn't hurt voting rights.
So in essence, they're saying there's just no evidence that it keeps people out of the polls. And like I said, turnout, including of Black and Hispanic voters, has increased greatly.
In 2005, a national bipartisan election reform commission, co-led by former President Jimmy Carter, even said ID laws were a good idea.
It will not restrict people from voting. It'll be uniformly applied throughout the country. and it will be non-discriminatory.
But nonpartisan voter advocates say that just hasn't happened.
Well, who doesn't have a driver's license? Poor people, communities of color, communities that have lower incidence of car ownership, which are lower income communities and communities of color.
And researchers say there's no evidence that voter ID laws have an effect on fraud, actual or perceived, which has some skeptical of stricter rules, even in states like Georgia that offer voter ID for free.
The free voter ID is only good for voting. But when you don't know where you're going to sleep at night or how you're going to feed your children or whether or not you can get a job, then that going through all of those hoops to get an ID that's only going to help you with something once a year is not something that most people have the capacity to do.
Is this political? Is there a political?
No, that's a totally false claim. And if you don't have a Georgia ID, including the free ID that the state will give you, you can instead provide a photocopy of a utility bill, bank statement, paycheck, or government document with your name and address on it. I don't know how anybody could possibly say that that is somehow a Jim Crow requirement. It's easily met.
Most Americans favor voter ID laws, and in Georgia, the support is even stronger, 74% backing the new rules for proof of ID to vote by mail. A state-by-state patchwork of ID laws that many say are only getting tougher to navigate, leaving volunteers and families in a sprint to close the ID gap.
Since September, we've helped 700 people, and that's just a drop in the bucket. And we have people waiting and waiting for our appointments. We can only do so much.
For ABC News, I'm Devin Dwyer in Washington.
Our thanks to Devin for that.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.